on the Reflection Podcast. I'm Ed Blonsky. Thank you for joining me today. And on today's show, I have a very special guest that I have a conversation with about how he reflects the light and the love of God in this dark world. Stay tuned after the conversation. I'll tell you how you can get in touch with us here at St. Matthew, and we'll take care of some other business as well. But first, let's get right to it on this episode of the Reflection Podcast. In the pastor's office with me today is Gary Midkiff. Thanks for joining me today, Gary.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Gary is actually a new Christian. I had the humble honor and privilege of actually baptizing Gary about almost a year ago. And it was just an incredible experience for me. And I wanted to have Gary come on and actually talk a little bit, maybe about that, but also just about his life so far. He's led a very interesting life, the glimpses that he has given me as I get to know Gary better. But right now, Gary, I'd like you to introduce yourself because, as I've often said before, you know you better than you. Actually, your mother knows you better, but she's not here.
No, she's not.
We're going to ask you to maybe give us a little bit of biography about who you are.
I grew up in a blue-collar suburb in South Chicago named South Howland, Illinois, and neither of my parents went to college. As a matter of fact, my dad dropped out of high school to fight in World War II. So I was the first member of my family to go to college, and I was prepared for that by my mom. My mom was convinced from an early age that I must read, and therefore there was a steady diet of books. I'm talking about classics, Robert Louis Stevenson, etc. And then she would require me to talk to her about what I read and what I had learned. So a lot of what I've done professionally, I would say, would be based upon that. My dad was an auto mechanic. He wanted me to be an auto mechanic, and I have absolutely zero skills in that area, so that didn't go very well. After I went to college and then went on to get my master's degree, Uncle Sam called. So I served our country for 2 years during the Vietnam era. I am proud to say I'm a veteran, but I always say to people who were in harm's way that I was behind a desk in the Pentagon and did nothing terribly important, although I am proud to say that I am a veteran. My career has been based in manufacturing and then in consulting, and a major portion of my career was spent doing worldwide consulting for strategy. My clients paid me to go to Moscow, Russia, Sydney, Australia, etc. So I got to visit a lot of neat places without having to pay for it. Later on, I became entrepreneurial. I started a software company with a friend of mine, and we were the subject of intellectual property theft. It was a very difficult and dark time. Anyone who has been involved in anything like that knows how difficult it is. While the battle was being fought in court, there was nothing for me to do. Our company couldn't go further, so there was nothing for me to do. So I looked around and I said, I wonder what I can do. I know I can drive a school bus a couple hours a day. I'm available to talk to my lawyers when necessary. So I started driving a school bus. The person who was in charge of the branch where I was working said, what are you doing driving a school bus? I explained my situation. They said, no, you should manage. I said, okay, I'll manage. So I was made a manager of a location in Prairie View, Illinois, which is just north of Buffalo Grove where I live. Now, talk about God's plan. We go through all of this stuff, right? And then one of the drivers who then reports to me is my wife, Carol. That's where I initially met her, was because she was driving a school bus. She needed part-time work, and there I was as a manager. We'll talk more about Carol as we go along, but that would be bringing professionally. Then after the company closed and we settled the suit, not to our economic favor, but we settled the suit, then I moved into what I'm doing now, which is working with foreign policy, working with politics, doing history lectures, and publishing my international newsletter. So that's the majority of my activities now.
Well, I knew there was a reason I liked you when I first met you. You're from the South Side, so.
Yes, I am. Definitely South Side. I was
South
the only
Cub Chicago.
I may have been the only Cub fan in South Howland.
No, my grandfather was, well, maybe not in South. My grandfather was a Cub fan in Hegewisch.
Oh,
About the only Cub fan down there as well. But the rest of our family from Hegwish was Sox fans, which is why maybe we don't get along as well as we probably could, because we root for different baseball teams. But that's okay.
I get to blame my mother for my Cub fandom because she raised me on that.
That
And
makes
although
sense.
she passed away before the Cubs won the World Series, after they did, Carol and I cut out a couple of sports pages and went down to the Lincoln National Military Cemetery where her remains are, and we scotch taped them all over her columbarium there. I know they took it down the next day, but I just had to do that. So we taped it up so that she would know.
Yep, my uncle Vic is also down there, and we had much the same thing. Somebody was able to put a flag on his grave after they won the World Series, so that was awesome. And
It was.
yeah, all right. So that's a little bit of a background that brings us up to sort of a present day. What is it that you actually are doing these days, at least professionally?
I have 110 clients. Most of them are senior living communities. It turns out that senior living community activity directors love to have intellectual programming or history programming. And I provide that with foreign policy discussions, my history lectures, etc. And it keeps folks sharp. I'm told that there are a lot of people who do music and comedy and stuff like that, but the activity directors want people with intellectual content for obvious reasons. So that is pretty much the niche that I followed all through the greater Chicago area. My clients are located, and that is the focus of my professional work.
I think that's so important too, because I also visit many senior living facilities as a pastor. And a lot of those, the people, the residents there, I notice and I witness that they're treated like children. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we sometimes forget these are adults with a lot of wisdom and a lot of background and a lot of history behind them, and that they actually have something they can contribute to, even though they may not even think so. But I think that we fall into a trap of, well, they're stuck in a home and they're their time is done. Let the younger ones take on. I'm glad to hear that you treat them like adults and intelligent people that they are, and give them dignity and respect. And I think we can learn a lot from them.
Many have become friends of Carol's and mine. Next week, Carol and I are going to a dinner at one of my senior living clients who have been invited because one person there said, I find this kind of funny. I will not name names, but she said, I'm darn tired of sitting down for dinner and having people only want to talk about the weather. I want to have a meaningful conversation during dinner. Gary, help me. So we've organized a dinner for, I think it's 16 people, and we're going to take a corner of their dining room, and we're going to talk about meaningful stuff for however long their dinner lasts.
That's great. And I hope that you'll at least take notes, if not record it.
Recording, I'm not going to be able to record now.
Yeah, I get that, because I think that when I talk to the younger people today, because I'm a Gen X, and we've got the millennials and Gen Y, and they think that everything that's happening in the world right now is so new and it's so unique. And actually, the older I get, the more I realize there's nothing new here at all. We've been down this road before. We can learn from people who've been down this road before, and we should listen to them. So please.
Thank you for mentioning your Gen X qualification. I am in the first year of the baby boomers. Thank you very much. So I probably stake my claim right there.
I'm glad you do. I'm in the first year of the Gen Xers. In fact, they actually call my generation Gen Jones now, because we're right in between the Gen X and boomers. I'm 1965. So, and I have a special affinity to that, the boomer generation, and even also the greatest generation, because my favorite music is actually big band music, really. Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, that kind of thing. And
my parents' favorite group, Glenn Miller.
Oh, absolutely.
Very much so, yes.
That's when music was music. And I don't know what happened today, and it gets just so much louder today. I don't know, but I guess I'm turning into that guy, get off my front lawn.
I've tried to listen to rap music, and I can simply say I don't resonate with it. I just don't understand.
Well, and there's actually, and you're the second person this week I've talked to about rap music, or at least it came up in conversation. There actually is a rap artist. He goes by the stage name of Flame. And now what he does is he actually raps, but from Luther's Small Catechism of all things,
Oh
which
my
is
goodness.
it's just incredible.
Oh
And
my.
so there is hope. There is hope for the next generation.
Luther with a beat. I never thought of that. Wow.
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
Um, let's and I don't know that this was actually in we just a little inside baseball for the listeners. We do talk about what are the things that we want to talk about in the interview and questions and things like that, and this one actually wasn't in the questions itself, but this is where the point of contact between you and me was, of you actually becoming a Christian, a
Right.
Lutheran Christian, and being actually baptized. You are actually one of the older people that I've baptized. You're not certainly, I've the vast majority of people I baptize as a pastor are infants. I
Of
have
course.
baptized adults, and but just not that many of them. What was that like? I know that we could spend hours and hours probably, but how did you get to that point?
There are two moments in that journey that I will share. The first one is the initial moment. My wife, Carol, is Lutheran, but had not been active in the Lutheran faith, associated with St. Matthew some years ago, but not currently active. And my background is Jewish. And one day, out of the blue, although I now know it was not out of the blue, but at the time it seemed like it was out of the blue, Carol said to me, I'd like to go back to Bible study. And I said, okay, well, if you're going to go to Bible study, then I'll go with you because we do things together. And so we began initially on Zoom, Sunday morning Bible study, and then moving to do it in person when we could. So that was the kickoff point, if you will, for my interesting journey. And then as the journey proceeded, and I talked about that in my testimony, which is not part of this, but I started having memories of sins and mistakes that I made in my life, which started washing over me. And I didn't know where in the world this was coming from. Why am I thinking about mistakes from 40 years ago? Why am I doing this to myself? So I worked with that for a while. And while I was doing that process, I had a meeting with Pastor and I said, I'm going through this stuff and I don't know exactly what's going on, but here's what's happening to me. And you laughed at me, sir. You laughed at me and you said, oh, God's wrestling with you. And I didn't understand the reference. I now know the reference, but I didn't understand the reference at the time. And you were, I mean, it's a serious topic, but you were lightly amused, sir. We had that conversation.
I wasn't exactly laughing at you. It's just
No, I understand that. I
yeah,
understand.
yeah. But it is. This is one of those things that growing up and training to be a pastor, I've had several mentors of mine saying this is the way it's supposed to work. And so that's, I was tickled that it works the way it's supposed to work. You give them the word and let the Holy Spirit do
And
his
the
thing.
word came from the Bible study, and it, with the Holy Spirit, infiltrated me, led to the questions, led to my meeting with you in the office. And then to prove what a fun guy you are, you then said, okay, here, read this Luther's Small Catechism. Enjoy yourself with this. Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
And that's exactly what it is, exactly as Gary describes it. I said, I've got a book for you to read. And it did help, though, that you like to read. That's certainly an
Yes.
important aspect of that. And that kind of coincides, or at least what this is a parallel of your faith journey as well as your professional or intellectual journey to
Mhm.
get to this point. You mentioned a little bit about your mother put you on the path of reading a lot.
Yes. Right.
Um, and then I kind of came along, the Holy Spirit kind of pushed me along and gave you more books to read. Um, a specific moment where the path that you're on today, what you're doing with your life, I would say professionally, but actually, I think the more accurate way to put this is that this is what your calling is. Can you recall a specific moment where it said, this is what I want to do? Like most people will say, this is what I want to do when I grow up, that kind of thing. What is it? Can you even pinpoint that?
I can. And with a biblical reference, it is success out of failure. You will recall, Pastor, that I walked into your office one day last April, and I stood there and I cried because I had just learned that I lost an election to school board in my community. I invested a lot of energy into that election. I have strong feelings about how young people should be educated. I thought that I could help my district, and I did not win that election. And I cried. It hurt because that's what I wanted to do. Little did I know that had I won that, I could not have become involved with St. Matthew the way that I am. So God needed to say, okay, we're closing that door, but look over here because we've got a door opening over. I wasn't even looking over there because I was a new Christian. I was still feeling my way around in terms of how do I fit into this structure that we have in the church. But I knew I wanted to do work for others. I thought it was going to be through the school board. It turns out it is going to be and is through St. Matthew. Someone knew where I was headed, but didn't give me all the road signs before I got there.
And I think that's probably a good thing because if we know the road signs, on the one hand, well, where's the mystery then? And what the joy of discovering? The other one is, well, I know what to avoid now because I want to go this way. And I find myself doing that a lot. God, you're making a mistake. And you probably can appreciate that's not a good thing to tell God.
That's not a good starting point.
That's not good. Yeah, you're right. And I do vividly remember that day. And I remember feeling bad afterwards because I could tell obviously this did hurt you deeply. And
it did.
But for me, it's like I could see beyond it. And so I'm thinking, well, yeah, of course you did. I knew you were going to because I know I kind of got an idea. This is what God wants you to do and wasn't in that area. So I may not have been as compassionate as I probably could have been. But I tried. Again, Southsider, not blue collar as well. And, I kind of wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit. So you get, this is what you get. So.
No, it's okay. It just was what I'm doing now, I could not be doing if I were on the school board because that would be sucking all of my discretionary time.
Yeah, because you do strike me as someone, if you're going to do something, you're going to give it your all. And there's no, I can do 8 hours here and 8 hours here. And that is a great ethic as well, to work ethic to have. What are some of the challenging situations that you faced? And the question is how you navigated through them, but maybe the more probing question is, how did God navigate you through those? But you've gone through some challenging situations in your life.
I remember one that I tell my students at North Park when I teach ethics. That's one of the 2 classes I teach at North Park, which I find a fascinating class to teach. College students go, why do I have to study this? I said, hang on, we'll get there. You'll understand by the time we finish. In my consulting career, I was in a situation where my boss, who was the national director of consulting, I had a region, told me that I had to take one of the women on my staff and assign her to certain clients because he would be visiting those clients and he wanted to be able to spend more time with her. She was married, he was married, not to each other. So essentially he was telling me, this is how you're going to manage your staff so that our inappropriate liaison can be supported on company expense. I remember getting in my car and driving around for a couple of hours because I knew that that was wrong, but the question was, how do I respond? Do I put my job in jeopardy? I am the sole breadwinner for my family at that moment. What is the correct thing to do? And I did pray, not as effectively, I believe, as I do now, but I did. And after driving around for a couple hours, I came back to the company headquarters, which are in Deerfield, and walked into the office of the owner and president of the company and said, we have a problem and I need your help. Sat down, explained it to him, and I said, it's your company, but we need to respond to this. Within 24 hours, he had fired my boss.
Whoops.
Because he had no tolerance for that sort of behavior. But I had no idea what the outcome was going to be. But after a couple of hours, I knew that I had to act on what I regarded as my moral principles. And that was probably the most dangerous in terms of career, the most dangerous thing I've ever had to confront.
It's hard to call out sin when we see it. And there's a lot of that going around. And what is the proper response? And I love how you took time. It wasn't kind of shooting from the hip, off the cuff, instant reaction. You, it, for me, it sounds like you were very proactive. What's the best way to deal with this? Not
Correct.
just
You're correct. I had to and when we get to my Zen discussion later, we'll talk about emotion. But that was important because we can't think clearly if we're highly emotional. So first one has to calm down and then work on it. So it took me a couple hours.
Yeah, I get it. And that's awesome that you were able to navigate through that. And from my perspective, again, I can see how the Holy Spirit kind of guided you around and maybe literally too down the streets.
Yeah. He and I hadn't met yet, but I'm sure he was there. Yes, we hadn't met yet.
Exactly right. You talked about your mother and
Yes.
and other people. I have a question that I ask my the people I have conversations with, role models or even mentors
Mhm.
that influence both your values and as well as a mindset of how to live out those values. What are some of those people in your life?
I would say first, and this may be semantical, that I don't have role models on purpose because people are human, people have faults, and to say I want to be like so and so, I think is dangerous. Looking back at my parents, both of whom were Marines in World War II, both of whom have passed away, I can see that they each tried really hard to try to teach me. My dad was honest to a fault. My dad worked 2 jobs 7 days a week for my entire life, literally, because he believed that mom should stay at home and take care of me, the only child. And mom was the one who said, you've got to read and got to improve yourself. So I appreciate those aspects of them. But in trying to do justice to your question, I did come up with 2 names of people that I admire for some of what they did. The first is Jimmy Carter. Speaking politically, Jimmy Carter's presidency was a disaster. We don't need to go into details on that. But what he did with his life after his presidency, I find incredibly admirable. He took the agency that he had and the leverage that he had, and he used it to create the Carter Foundation, go around the world to try to promote free elections, became involved in Habitat for Humanity as he became older. And I find that admirable about him. That's not role model. That is, I like what you do with your life. And the second is Nelson Mandela. Now, many people don't know that the reason Nelson Mandela was in prison for so many years was that he was a terrorist and killed people. Gee, that sounds like one of the apostles. Anyway, so yeah, and he killed people. That's why he was in prison. But when he came out of prison, he said something incredible. He said, there will be no retribution. There will be no retribution. We need to go forward, not backward, to correct things that were wrong before. And how he behaved after prison, to me, is admirable. Also shows a lot of strength of character to be able to do that. So those 2, besides my parents, those 2 men in those aspects of their life, I think set really good standards of behavior.
I get that. Like you said, Nelson Mandela kind of mirrors the career of the Apostle Paul, who
Right.
Was imprisoned, not necessarily literally incarcerated, but imprisoned within his own religion and ideology until he was set free. And he was murdering people too, or at least condoning it. And
Right.
and Jesus came along and said, "Hey, I got something else for you to do." And yeah, I think that today, especially 21st century America, we do see a lot of revenge or vengefulness. We have to nip this in the bud and take revenge, and we forget, even as Christians. And I'm speaking specifically to a Christian now that might be thinking that God has something very distinct to say about that. And he says, no revenge. That's my job. I will repay. Your job is love.
No revenge, and no judgment.
Right. Your job is
That's one of the ones that I struggle with about the judgment side.
It is hard, because I think it's hard because, one, we don't understand what judgment means. Sometimes we believe that judgment is actually, even calling out sin is a judgment. It's like, not necessarily. Judgment is the justice that comes from that, and that's not our job. That's God's job. Our job is to simply speak the truth in love, and err on the side of love, like Nelson Mandela did. He erred on the side of love more than anything else, and Jimmy Carter as well. I mean, people can say what they want politically about Jimmy Carter and his presidency in at the end of the 1970s, but what he did with what he was given,
right?
He loved his neighbor.
Up until the last year or so, he was still teaching Sunday school at his church until he was physically incapacitated.
Right. The last year of his life, not just his presidency. I mean, he
right,
taught.
right.
In fact, I did run across, it was somebody here at our church that was on vacation, and they actually went down on vacation through Georgia and sat in on his.
Oh, how cool. That would be wonderful. Wow.
That would be. And they said it was very enjoyable, and very intelligent man from what they told me, and knew his Bible. And so those are, I would say those are pretty good role models to have. Someone who knows their place in this world and knows God's calling on their own lives. Let's talk a little bit about the activities and hobbies that bring joy and fulfillment outside of your professional life, because I know you have several of them that are very interesting.
There are three that I would call hobbies. One I'm no longer active in. I'll explain that. And two I am. When I was younger, I ran a total of 21 marathons, including the Boston Marathon once. That was the height of my running career. But as a true baby boomer, I now have an artificial knee and an artificial hip, and pretty much running is out of the question. So that is a past hobby, not a current hobby. In terms of the hobbies I continue, one of them is cooking, which is a very serious hobby for me. My grandmother, who came to this country from Luxembourg, was a chef. She cooked for Marshall Fields downtown at one point, and then she owned her own restaurant in Itasca at one point. And genetically, I am sure that she passed that down to me. I went to cooking school in France and graduated, so technically I'm a certified chef. I never, ever would want to work in a restaurant. The hours that those people work is not attractive to me. But Carol and I like to give small dinner parties and invite people over to our home. And as we've become more used to sharing kitchen space together, now we can work together in the kitchen, which makes cooking even more fun. There's a personal anecdote. It's a short story. When Carol and I were first getting together, we had an epiphany moment. And she found out I could cook, which made her very happy. And I found out she had her own toolbox, which makes me very happy, because my response to a project is, who do I call? Carol's response to a project is, where's my toolbox? So I could cook. She liked to do projects. We knew that something was cooking, Pastor.
I get it. and
the other
yeah, go ahead.
The other hobby is chess, and I've been involved in chess since high school. I'm a life member of the U.S. Chess Federation. I have a national rating. It's very, very low. And I don't play over the board anymore, because when you do that, you've got to give up your weekends. And I've got too much to do with my weekends. So I'm part of an international group called Lichess, Lichess. It's about 60,000 of us. And we play online with various time controls. I'm currently playing a game against a young man from Serbia. And that satisfies me in terms of chess. I also spent some time a few weeks ago at one of my senior living communities who wanted to start a chess club. And I went over and worked with them for a few hours and taught a class about how you play chess. And they're going to bring me back in a couple of weeks so I can share that with some of the other residents there.
My father taught me how to play chess early on, and I never got to the point where I was any good at it. I just know where the pieces go and how they move. But it is a fascinating bonding experience to be able to play chess with someone, because you really do bond with them because you get to know them.
For people who are listening to this who aren't on camera right now, many of them will probably relate to the following story. I taught my children how to play chess. And early on, my daughter in particular would say, well, aren't you going to let me win? To which the answer was no. No. What I would do is I would take my rooks and my queen off the board and play with a reduced strength set of pieces. But I never let her win. No, because she wouldn't learn anything. But I did reduce the strength of my army. I did do that.
I'm glad to hear that, because there's a well, that's a whole another episode, I think. Goes right on along there with trophies for everybody. But anyway, don't get me started.
Oh yeah, no.
So life lessons that you've learned. You've been around the sun a few times. What would you want to pass on to someone else?
Outside of religion, I have benefited from the study of Zen, which I've done for decades. And Zen is not a religion. It is more of a philosophy about how you live life. And there are 3 Zen lessons, which when I was thinking about the interview, I wrote them down. There are 3 Zen lessons which continue to pay dividends for me. The first one is, we need to see the world as it is, not as we are, which means take out the bias, take out the anger, take out all of that stuff, and try to actually see what the world is. We can figure out the world better if we remove all of those filters that we typically have. Number 2 would be, remember that I cannot control anyone's actions or behavior, but I can always control my response, which means I'm never a victim, because I can walk away. I can do whatever I choose to do. I can't control what they're going to do. Can't do that. But you can always control your response. So you're always, from that perspective, in control. And the third one has to do with anger. You need to visualize this one. If you imagine someone being angry with you and sending arrows of anger at you, you need to learn to let them go through your body and dissipate behind you. Because if you try to return the anger, it makes it stronger. And then they return it and it gets stronger still. So the way to diffuse anger from someone else is to let it, the Zen image is, let it pass through you, dissipate, then you might be able to make some progress. All 3 of those have been really helpful for me in my life. And I write about them in my newsletter and talk about them. But those 3 life lessons, all of which come from Zen, have been really important.
I have taught many classes in the past 30 years. One of the classes I have taught to 8th graders actually is world religions. And we talk about Buddhism and the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. And the way I have approached this is that the world religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Shinto, Islam, Judaism, are actually, even though they're not Christian, right? And so as Christians, we would say, no, they're not the right way. They're not the way God would want us to go, but they do have echoes of the right way, because they are either echoes or shadows of what we would consider true religion. And Buddhism, I think, fits in that very well, the Eightfold Path as well. It as long as you're not doing it in order to be saved, but if you look at it from the perspective of, this is how I'm going to live my life, especially because I am saved by grace alone, as Lutherans tend to put it, say by grace alone, through faith alone, then it becomes, and I'll use a big church word, sanctified life. And so I don't think we need to be afraid. There are some Christians that would be afraid, oh, he's talking about Zen, talking about Buddhism, that's heresy and things like that. I don't think you need to be afraid of that. Is that you see them for what they are. And
some of the lessons from Buddha are very relevant and important. So that doesn't mean I'm worshiping the fat guy on the mat over there. It means that he had some good ideas,
Yes.
which it makes sense to me to blend into how I behave.
Right. They become, and to use the analogy you used before with your wife, they're part of our toolbox.
Yep.
That's excellent.
Oh, Carol's going to laugh when she sees this. Yeah. Okay.
So as we go through our lives, we do reflect, and that's what the purpose of one of the purposes of this podcast is, to show that we are reflecting God. We are reflecting Jesus to other people. We don't shine with our own light. We shine with the light of Christ in us. So I want to give you an opportunity to shine. And we'll put it this way. I'm going to give you a gigantic billboard, and millions, if not billions of people are going to be able to see this driving on this sort of hypothetical highway through life. And they're going to get
this is not going to be billboards with Brian Urlacher's head.
No, right.
Like we see in Chicago. Okay,
in
fine.
Chicago, we see a lot of that, don't we? And
we do.
The two bodybuilder lawyers as well. But they're going to get a brief glimpse of this. What would you put on that billboard that you want to reflect to them from God?
Matthew 22.
Okay.
Love the Lord your God with all your soul and all your mind. If you are trying to do that, not necessarily succeeding because we're human, but if you're trying to do that, that means that you are going to reflect your word, mirror my word in terms of what God would prefer us to do and the choices he'd prefer us to make. And that would be what I would put on the billboard.
Got it. Very excellent. See, that's this question that comes up in my conversations, then it becomes the title of the episode. So
it
that
does?
helps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
That helps me out. So this is a new question for me. I've done about 20 of these conversations for the last year, but now I want, because you are a cook, a chef, actually, I should put it, because but you're going to host a dinner party, and the question is originally given as 3 fictional characters, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a fictional character. But you're going to get to invite 3 people with you and your wife, Carol. Who are they going to be? And then the follow-up is, what are you going to serve them? But let's talk about who they are first.
What is funny about this question is that we have played this game in my family for decades, with my children initially. And when I saw that in your preparatory notes, I just smiled and said, oh, I guess we're not the only family that has done this. So the 3 people I would invite, first would be Abraham Lincoln. I regard him as our greatest president by far. His entire term in office was defined by the Civil War, which is the greatest calamity our country has ever faced. And of the many Lincoln quotes that I have, as some of you know, I collect quotations. The one Lincoln quote that I think is particularly wise is where he says, quote, I always walk slowly, but I never walk backwards. And what that says about a leader is, I'm going in this direction. I'm not going to sprint, because I need to be sure that I'm bringing everybody with me and they understand. I don't get so far ahead that I've got to go, whoops, let's backtrack just a bit. Backtracking isn't good. And Lincoln understood that. Also, I find it fascinating that Lincoln was a great student of the Bible. He memorized huge parts of it. When you analyze his speeches, there are just sections just put right into his speeches that just roll along. But he hated organized religion and didn't like to walk into a church. I suspect he had something against pastors, but I'm speculating. I don't know that. But he didn't like to go into a church, but he was certainly a godly man, and he certainly knew the scriptures backwards and forwards. So first would be Abraham Lincoln. The second person would be Winston Churchill. In the end of the 20th century, as many countries were voting on who is the greatest person in the 20th century, Great Britain picked Winston Churchill, not surprising. And what he accomplished during a relatively short period of time as prime minister. By the way, a plug for the movie Darkest Hour, if you have not seen that, where Gary Oldman plays Churchill. You need to see it right away. It is a superb and historically accurate movie. And what Churchill managed to do in an environment where no one trusted him for reasons related to World War I, and most people wanted to do something different, which was appease Hitler, and he said, we're not going to do that. That leadership and focus was incredible. And I'd like to, and Winston Churchill would probably just talk for hours. We'd have to have a lot of bourbon. Oh my, we'd have to have a lot of bourbon in the house because that was legendary for his consumption. And the third person would be a man named George Kennan. George Kennan is probably the greatest practitioner of foreign policy in U.S. history. And he was active during the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And he advised Roosevelt and Truman and Eisenhower and Kennedy, etc. He became fluent in the Russian language. As a matter of fact, when he met Stalin once, Stalin said, you speak Russian better than I do. Pretty smart guy, very adept at language, because he said, if you're going to understand another country and understanding Russia, Cold War, that was most important. He said, you've got to understand the language. How are you going to understand how they think? And he did. And I'm a member of a foreign policy discussion group named in his honor, the Kennan Group. And we are still amazed when we read about things that he said, how relevant they are to today's political situations. The only difficulty we would have at the table is asking one person to stop for a minute so someone else could get a word in edgewise. That might be a challenge. Other than that, though, I think it would be great fun.
So what are you going to serve these three gentlemen?
Because of my background, I'm going to serve them French onion soup, which Churchill will probably be upset with because it's French. And then I'm going to have to serve something beef. Kennan apparently liked beef, and so did Lincoln. So it'd be something beef-based. And then Carol, who's excellent at cakes, would make a cake. And knowing Carol, she would probably decorate the top of the cake with 3 different flags, you know, to symbolize the times where they were living. It would probably go like that. I would serve wine, but of course for Winston it'd be bourbon because he didn't drink wine.
That's right. And it's interesting how with Churchill, 2 things come to mind. One, he loved the bourbon, and that's a somewhat uniquely American drink.
Yes, but his mother was American, remember?
And his mother was an American anyway, so there is that connection. He's also, and this is, we do share that affinity. Lincoln is one of my favorites. I'm looking off camera here at my bookshelf, my American history bookshelf, and many of the books are Lincoln, or at least by Lincoln. Some of them are Doris Kearns or even Carl Sandburg, that was a Lincoln biographer. But
I have both of those books, including the full Sandburg set.
Yes. The thing I like about Churchill is that he was one of the few people who actually learned the right lessons from World War I, because nobody else did, which is why we had World War II. And he was able, because he did fight in, he was there in World War I, but that was one of the reasons why he said never appease, we will never surrender, because he knew what he was up against. And Lincoln.
My favorite Churchill quote, by the way, Churchill was a great writer. And when he was in between political tours in Britain, he wrote a lot of history. And he said, history is going to be very kind to me because I'm going to write it.
It's always helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
To be able to have the final say. Exactly.
Yes.
Right. So I don't have this in the list of things that I prepared you for, but I have asked other conversationalists that I have this with books. What are you reading now, or what would you recommend? And this also, knowing that you're an author, is a chance to plug your own books as well.
I'm not going to plug my own books. I'm not going to do that. I always read at least 2 books at once, and often 3. And the reason for that is my reading is affected by what time of the day and how much time I have. So I can read things that are more challenging earlier in the day. And if it's in the evening and Carol's watching a movie or something, then I want to read something which is a bit more lighthearted, or at least it's not lighthearted. I don't think I read anything lighthearted, but easier to consume when I do that. So what I can do let me pull my note out. So just give me a second, because I wasn't prepared for this question, but I will be prepared momentarily. One of the things I do in my newsletter is I publish every year something that I call the Darius Award, named after a friend who died. And it is the best book that I read that year, regardless of when it was published. So for reference, for those of you who are listening to this, I can go back over the last couple of years and pick out a couple of those books that I thought were particularly good. Last year, the book was titled A Conflict of Visions by Thomas Sowell, Sowell. He is an incredibly brilliant man, still writing, is in his 90s now. He is still writing and is incredible. The book from the previous year, 2022, that won the award would be an amazing book called Yes to Life by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl's parents and pregnant wife were killed in the Holocaust. He managed somehow to survive and develop a positive outlook on life. He's a better person than I am, because how he was able to do that and reading about it was amazing. And then if we go back one more year before that, the book is called Kennan, named after George Kennan, An American Life by William Gaddis. He won a Pulitzer Prize. It's a biography of Kennan. So I would certainly recommend those three.
Got it. I'm going to put those in the show notes and links to them probably on that big online bookseller that everybody loves to use. So, but you're not the first person to recommend the Viktor Frankl book. So that actually, I think, is resonating with a lot of people. That and the Holocaust, I think, is that whole experience is something that I'm glad that my guests, my conversationalists are bringing up, because another generation needs to know that, because we've forgotten the never again movement of that we cannot allow that to happen again if it's all possible, and we need to learn about that. So
a survey published in The Economist a few months ago indicated that of people below the age of 30, if this is not exactly correct, it's close, people below the age of 30, 25% do not believe the Holocaust happened. And people who are 65 and over, 100% know it happened.
Yeah.
That disparity shouldn't exist.
No, it should not. And Viktor Frankl actually was, like you said, he's a survivor, and it certainly did impact his life. And it's something that I think a lot of people will benefit from knowing that. Thomas Sowell, excellent author as well, can teach us a lot, and we certainly should be learning these things. So
when I read the Frankl book, I had to put it down a few times and just calm down a bit, because it's his life, not my life, and he's talking about what happened before, but it was just hard to consume.
It is,
but worthwhile.
It's very heavy, but an incredible story. As we wrap up, anything that you wished I had asked and I didn't?
I'm just going to go ahead and share the statement. You don't need to figure out what the question was. I mentioned about losing the school board election and then having time and a desire to help others, which brought me into St. Matthew. The number of people that I have met at St. Matthew, some of whom have already become friends of ours, some of whom I suspect will become friends of ours, in terms of their focus on I'm going to call it a Christ-centered community. I think that's probably good, who want to do good both inside the church and go beyond it and work with each other and enjoy each other's company. This is not something that I have experienced in my spiritual walk before. And I don't know if it's unique, because I've got no standard of comparison, but it certainly is nice and rewarding and very satisfying. So that would just be the statement. Whatever question you ask, that's my answer.
And if people want to find out more about that, they can certainly go to the St. Matthew website and join us and find out for themselves just what Gary and Carol, his wife, have found out firsthand as well. We are nice people. We enjoy having new faces come in and become part of what we call it a family here at St. Matthew. So
It's a fair description.
good. I'm glad that you took the time with me, Gary, today for our listeners and viewers to get to know you a little bit better, the way I do and the way I'm getting to know you. And it's been a great, and I think we're going to want to have you another conversation later on, and maybe about specific topics that are very important as well. But this serves as a great introduction to our listeners of another soul here at St. Matthew that has something to say. Thanks for joining me today.
You are very welcome.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Gary on this episode of the Reflection Podcast. Reflection is a weekly podcast that is produced by St. Matthew Lutheran Church. We are in Hawthorne Woods, Illinois. We would love to see you in person at St. Matthew. If you find yourself in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, we are about an hour's drive northwest of downtown Chicago, but only a half hour's drive of O'Hare Airport. And we'd love to see you come and be a part of our worship services, our Bible studies, or other events that we have here at St. Matthew. You can connect with us by going to our website at www.stmatts.net, stmatts.net. You can also find us on our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and we are on Instagram. Our podcast music is provided by the podcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. Find your own free podcast music over at the podcasthost.com/free music. Also, please rate and review our podcast. Share it with others and let us know what you thought of the podcast. And join me again next time for more reflection.